Warsaw, September 1, 1932. A young mathematician named Marian Rejewski walked through the gates of the Saxon palace in Warsaw, his shoes clicking against cobblestone as he reported for his first day as a civilian employee of the Polish Cipher Bureau. The building loomed before him, elegant and imposing, headquarters of the General Staff, where military strategy was forged and state secrets were guarded. He carried no weapon, wore no uniform. Just a mathematics degree from Poznan University and a mind trained in permutation theory. Rejewski entered alongside two other young mathematicians, Henryk Zygalski and Jerzy Rosicki. All three had been handpicked from the same secret cryptology course, all fluent in German, all brilliant with numbers. Their assignment seemed impossibly mundane at first, breaking a simple four-letter naval code. But behind a locked door somewhere in that building sat something far more dangerous. Intercepted radio messages from the German military, scrambled by a machine the Poles barely understood. It was called Enigma, and no one in the world had cracked it. Rejewski didn't know it yet, but within 3 months, his boring desk job would accomplish what British and French intelligence had failed to do for years. He would unlock the secret that would change the course of the coming war. The threat had been looming since February 23, 1918, when German engineer Arthur Skerbius filed a patent for a cipher machine based on rotating wired wheels, a rotor machine. He called it Enigma, after the Greek word for riddle. The machine began commercial production in 1923, marketed to banks and businesses seeking secure communications. It was bulky at first, weighing about 50 kilograms, but ingenious in design. When an operator pressed a key, electrical current flowed through a series of rotating discs, scrambling the input letter and illuminating a different output letter on a lampboard above the keyboard. Each key press advanced the rotors, creating a polyalphabetic cipher that changed with every letter typed. The German military took notice. The German Navy adopted a modified Enigma in 1926, followed soon after by the German Army and Air Force. The military versions were far more sophisticated than their commercial predecessors. They incorporated a plug board, called a steckerbrett, that added another layer of scrambling before the signal even reached the rotors. The total theoretical number of possible configurations came to over 150 trillion. To German cryptographers, it seemed mathematically unbreakable. On July 15, 1928, the first German machine-enciphered messages were broadcast by German military radio stations. Polish monitoring stations began intercepting them immediately. Poland, wedged between Germany and the Soviet Union, had learned the hard way that survival depended on knowing what your neighbors were planning. During the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921, approximately 100 Russian ciphers were broken by Polish cryptologists, providing intelligence that helped secure Polish independence. Radio interception wasn't just useful, it was existential. But Enigma was different. The commercial model that Poland had legally acquired offered only superficial clues. The military version's internal wiring remained a mystery. Cryptologists in the Polish Cipher Bureau's German section were instructed to try to read the intercepted messages. The effort was fruitless and was eventually abandoned. By the early 1930s, the situation had grown urgent. Germany was rearming in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Economic warfare against Poland intensified. Diplomatic tensions simmered. And every day, Polish radio operators intercepted hundreds of encrypted German military signals, messages about troop movements, strategic plans, diplomatic negotiations, all rendered meaningless by Enigma's impenetrable cipher. The traditional tools of cryptanalysis, frequency analysis, pattern recognition, linguistic intuition, were useless here. The letters in Enigma ciphertext appeared with almost uniform frequency. There were no repeated patterns to exploit, no statistical footholds. The machine had been designed specifically to defeat every known method of code-breaking. Poland's Cipher Bureau faced a stark reality. Unless someone could crack Enigma, Poland would be blind to German intentions. And in 1932, with Hitler's rise to power imminent, being blind meant being defenseless. What the Bureau needed wasn't more linguists or more intercepted messages. It needed a completely different approach, one rooted not in language, but in mathematics. The solution came from an unexpected direction. In 1929, Zdzisław Krygowski, a professor at the University of Poznan, organized a secret course on cryptology for the best students of mathematics. Krygowski, who came from the famous Lviv School of Mathematics, was approached to do so by the Cipher Bureau of the Polish Army. The course was held at a military installation near Poznan, shrouded in secrecy. 20-odd Poznan University mathematics students who were proficient in German accepted an invitation to attend. They learned basic cryptanalysis, studied cipher systems, practiced code-breaking techniques, all under the watchful eye of military intelligence officers. 3 students stood out: Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosicki, and Henryk Zygalski, all graduates of the University of Poznan's mathematics faculty. Rejewski, born in 1905, had completed his master's thesis on doubly periodic functions under Krygowski's supervision in March 1929. He was methodical, quiet, intensely focused. Rosicki, born in 1909, was the youngest, brilliant with numbers and blessed with a sense of humor that made him the life of any party. Zygalski, born in 1908, was even-tempered and collaborative, never seeking the spotlight despite his exceptional talent. In the autumn of 1930, a new branch of the Cipher Bureau opened in utmost secrecy in Poznan. The 3 mathematicians began working part-time while continuing their studies, handling routine code-breaking assignments and learning the craft of signals intelligence. Their work seemed pedestrian, breaking simple substitution ciphers, analyzing radio traffic patterns, transcribing intercepted messages. But they were being trained for something far more ambitious. Then, in late 1931, an extraordinary intelligence windfall arrived from France. In October 1931, Hans Thilo Schmidt offered to sell top-secret documents to the French. Schmidt was a German civilian employee working at the Chiffrierstelle, the German Armed Forces cryptographic headquarters. His motivations were mundane. He was a womanizer, a heavy spender, perpetually desperate for money. His older brother Rudolf was a respected Wehrmacht general, which made Hans Thilo's betrayal all the more bitter. His offer was accepted by Captain Gustave Bertrand of French intelligence, and he received the code name Asha. Over the following months, Schmidt delivered a treasure trove: copies of the Enigma machine's instruction manual, operating procedures, lists of daily key settings used by German operators. The French received all of it, and couldn't do anything with it. French cryptologists examined the documents, studied the diagrams, and concluded the problem was unsolvable. The British, when offered the same material, politely declined. Both intelligence services were staffed with brilliant linguists and experienced codebreakers, but they approached Enigma the way they had approached ciphers for centuries, as a language puzzle, not a mathematical one. In December 1932, Bertrand shared intelligence obtained from Asha with the Polish General Staff's Cipher Bureau. The Poles had been moved to Warsaw by then, working full-time in the Saxon palace. Major Maximilian Sieski, chief of the German section, delivered the French documents to Rejewski with a simple directive: see what you can do with this. Rejewski had already been wrestling with Enigma for months. He had built a theoretical framework, equations describing how the rotors transformed letters, how the plugboard scrambled them, how the reflector sent the current back through the machine in reverse. But there were too many unknowns. The internal wiring of the rotors remained a mystery. Every day the Germans changed their key settings, and without knowing the rotor wirings, those daily keys were meaningless. The key settings lists provided by Schmidt helped fill in enough of the unknowns in Rejewski's formulae, allowing him to speedily solve the equations and recover the wirings. It was a moment of pure mathematical revelation, like finding the Rosetta Stone hidden in a pile of intercepted radio traffic. Rejewski didn't need to steal a machine or bribe a German operator. He needed group theory, permutation analysis, and just enough real-world data to anchor his equations in reality. What happened next would determine whether Poland could survive the coming storm, and whether the world would remain blind to Hitler's plans. What Rejewski accomplished in late 1932 was not traditional code-breaking. It was pure mathematics, specifically the theory of permutations and groups. Where linguists saw encrypted letters, Rejewski saw transformations. Every time a German operator pressed a key on the Enigma, the electrical current followed a specific path through the machine's components: keyboard, plugboard, entry drum, 3 rotors, reflector, and back again, emerging as a different letter. Each letter was permuted, swapped for another in a mathematically precise way. Rejewski modeled the entire Enigma system as a composition of permutations. He represented each component, plugboard, rotors, reflector, as a mathematical function that transformed the alphabet. The German's procedural mistake gave him his opening. Operators were required to encipher the 3-letter message key twice consecutively in the initial 6 characters of each message. The first and fourth letters of an indicator were the same plaintext letter, enciphered at different rotor positions. By collecting hundreds of these indicators from a single day's traffic, Rejewski could build permutation chains, cycle structures that revealed the machine's internal logic. Rejewski derived 6 permutations corresponding to the encipherment at 6 consecutive positions of the Enigma machine, which could be described by equations with various unknowns. But he hit a wall. Too many unknowns, rotor wirings, reflector connections, plug board settings. The equations were theoretically solvable, but practically impossible without more data. Then came Schmidt's documents. The documents enabled him to reduce the number of unknowns and solve the wirings of the rotors and reflector. One final obstacle remained. The commercial Enigma Rejewski had studied used German keyboard order, QWERTZ, for connecting keys to the entry drum. But the military Enigma had been wired in alphabetical order, A, B, C, D, E, F. British cryptologists, when they encountered this choice, dismissed alphabetical wiring as too obvious. Rejewski simply tried it. After making this assumption, from my pencil, as by magic, began to issue numbers designating the connections in rotor N. He had reconstructed the machine without ever seeing one. Rejewski was not a spy. He carried no gun, ran no agents, conducted no dramatic raids. He was a mathematician who showed up every morning to a small, cramped office in the Saxon palace and worked through equations with pencil and paper. His genius lay not in boldness but in patience, the ability to sit with an impossible problem for months, refining hypotheses, testing frameworks, waiting for the right data to anchor his theories. On March 1, 1929, he was awarded a master's degree for his thesis on the theory of double periodic functions of the second and third kind. His training was theoretical, abstract, far removed from the immediate needs of military intelligence. Yet that abstraction became his greatest weapon. Where others saw Enigma as a language problem, Rejewski saw it as a permutation group, a mathematical structure with properties that could be exploited. He worked alone at first. In late October or early November 1932, Captain Maximilian Sieski tasked Rejewski to work alone on the German Enigma I machine for a couple of hours per day. Rejewski was not to tell his colleagues what he was doing. The isolation was intentional. Fewer people knowing meant fewer chances for leaks. But it also meant Rejewski bore the entire weight of the problem himself. No one to share the frustration when equations yielded inconsistent results. No one to celebrate the small breakthroughs. On June 20, 1934, Rejewski married Irina Maria Lewandowska, daughter of a prosperous dentist. They would have 2 children, a son, Andrei, born in 1936, and a daughter, Janina, born in 1939. Throughout it all, Rejewski maintained the silence required of him. His wife knew he worked for the military. She did not know he had broken the most sophisticated cipher machine in existence. Breaking Enigma once was an intellectual triumph. Breaking it every day, 4 years, as the Germans continually modified their procedures and equipment, required something more, automation. Probably in 1934 or 1935, Rejewski designed the cyclometer, a cryptologic device to catalog the cycle structure of Enigma permutations. It was constructed with 2 sets of Enigma rotors and a switchboard connected to switches and small light bulbs that indicated the length of a given cycle. The cyclometer was used to prepare a catalog of the length and number of cycles for all 17,576 positions of the rotors for a given sequence of rotors. Since there were 6 possible rotor orders, the complete catalog contained 105,456 entries. Preparation of the catalog was laborious and took over a year, but once complete, finding daily keys became a matter of minutes. Then, on September 15, 1938, the Germans changed entirely the rules for enciphering message keys. The catalog method became useless overnight. Rejewski responded by inventing something unprecedented, the bomba cryptologicsna, designed around October 1938. Each bomba consisted of 6 interconnected replica Enigma machines that automatically cycled through the 17,576 possible combinations of 3 rotors to identify the correct daily key configuration in approximately 2 hours. 6 of them were constructed at the AVA Radio Manufacturing Company in Warsaw. They were loud, mechanical, temperamental. Rejewski himself stated that the device had been dubbed a bomb for lack of a better idea. But they worked. By 1938, Polish cryptographers were reading some 75% of intercepted German radio transmissions enciphered using the Enigma machine. The breakthrough didn't happen in isolation. Hans Thilo Schmidt was a German who spied for the French, obtaining access to German cipher materials that included the daily keys used in September and October 1932. Schmidt's espionage provided the raw data Rejewski needed, but only because French intelligence, instead of hoarding the material, chose to share it. The British, when offered the same documents, had dismissed them as unusable. The French passed them to Poland, their ally on Germany's eastern flank, a nation they believed might have a unique perspective on the German threat. That act of sharing proved decisive. Without Schmidt's codebooks, Rejewski's equations would have remained unsolvable. Without French willingness to trust Polish cryptologists, the documents would have gathered dust in Parisian filing cabinets. The collaboration was quiet, unofficial, conducted through intelligence backchannels rather than diplomatic ceremonies. But it represented a recognition that breaking Enigma wasn't a task for any single nation. It required pooling resources, expertise, and intelligence assets across borders. The relationship deepened over the years. As German procedures evolved and the Polish bomba became insufficient, the three nations continued exchanging information. When Poland faced imminent invasion in 1939, the decision to hand over everything, machines, techniques, mathematical frameworks, to Britain and France wasn't just generosity. It was strategic necessity. If Poland fell, the knowledge couldn't be allowed to die with it. German commanders believed Enigma was unbreakable, so they used it for everything from submarine coordinates to high command directives. By 1941, German leadership had generally assumed that their messages remained unread, which meant that operational decisions continued under the belief that no intelligence agency could match the amount of mathematical work required to decrypt a single day's settings. This confidence wasn't baseless. The Enigma used a combination of rotors, plugs, and wiring to code messages and was said to have as many as 103 sextillion possible settings, a number so vast it seemed to guarantee security. The Germans believed their cipher to be unbreakable, and this overconfidence was their Achilles heel. They saw Enigma through the lens of their own engineering excellence, a precision-built machine with mathematical complexity beyond any conceivable human effort to defeat. What they failed to anticipate was that their opponents wouldn't attack the machine itself, but the human procedures surrounding it. The requirement to send message keys twice, the reuse of common phrases like "nothing to report," the tendency of lazy operators to use predictable plugboard settings, these weren't flaws in Enigma's design. They were flaws in its implementation. They placed trust in the machine's structure and ignored the risk posed by human error, repeated message content, or captured materials. German cryptographic security relied on perfect discipline from thousands of radio operators across multiple theaters of war, operating under stress, fatigue, and combat conditions. It assumed that no one would ever betray the keys, that no machine would ever be captured, that no operator would ever deviate from protocol. That assumption proved catastrophic. Timing was everything. Rejewski broke Enigma in December 1932, 7 years before the outbreak of World War II. That head start gave Poland years to refine techniques, build cataloging systems, develop the bomba, and train additional cryptologists. When war came, Poland wasn't starting from scratch. They had operational procedures, proven methods, and machines already in production. Had the breakthrough come even 2 years later, Poland might not have had time to share its knowledge before being overrun. Had it come during wartime, under the chaos of invasion and evacuation, critical insights might have been lost. The quiet years between 1932 and 1939 allowed the Polish Cipher Bureau to transform a mathematical discovery into an industrial-scale intelligence operation. By 1938, Polish cryptographers were reading some 75% of intercepted German radio transmissions enciphered using the Enigma machine, a stunning intelligence advantage that shaped Poland's understanding of German intentions during the final pre-war years. The 1932 breakthrough also predated major German upgrades to Enigma. The three-rotor military machine Rejewski solved was complex, but still within reach of patient mathematical analysis. By 1939, when the Germans introduced additional rotors and changed procedures, the problem had grown exponentially harder. But by then, the foundation had been laid. The principle was proven: Enigma could be broken. All that remained was scaling up the effort to match German innovations. The war that followed would be fought on battlefields across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. But its outcome would be shaped, in significant measure, by decisions made in a Warsaw office in 1932, by a young mathematician with a pencil, paper, and the stubborn belief that even the most complex cipher could be reduced to solvable equations. Around December 9 or 10, 1932, the documents were given to Rejewski. They arrived in a plain envelope, delivered through intelligence channels, pages of German operating procedures, lists of daily keys for September and October, fragments of instructions written in bureaucratic German prose. Rejewski spread them across his desk in the Saxon palace, a small underground room the cryptologists jokingly called the Black Chamber. Outside, Warsaw was cold and dark. Inside, under a single lamp, Rejewski began the final assault on Enigma's secrets. The documents enabled him to reduce the number of unknowns and solve the wirings of the rotors and reflector. For weeks, Rejewski had been constructing equations, mathematical representations of how Enigma scrambled letters. He knew the machine structure in theory: keyboard to plugboard to entry drum to 3 rotors to reflector, then back through the same components in reverse. But the specific wiring inside each rotor remained a mystery. There were 26 input contacts and 26 output contacts on each rotor, and the connections between them could be arranged in over 400 million trillion ways. Without knowing those wirings, his equations had too many variables and no unique solution. Schmidt's documents changed that. The key lists provided real-world anchor points, days when Rejewski knew exactly how the machine had been configured, which rotors had been used, what their starting positions had been. He could now solve his equations not in abstract space, but against concrete data. By late November 1932, Rejewski had deduced the wiring for the first rotor, followed by the second and third by early December. Each rotor emerged from his calculations like a ghostly image developing in a photographer's darkroom. Rotor I, A connected to E, B to K, C to M, and so on through all 26 letters. Rotor 2, another permutation, completely different. Rotor 3, a third unique arrangement. He verified each solution by testing it against intercepted messages, checking whether his reconstructed machine produced the same outputs the Germans were broadcasting. The numbers aligned. The permutations held. The rotors were correct. But one obstacle remained. The military Enigma had been modified from the commercial Enigma, of which Rejewski had had an actual example to study. In the commercial machine, the keyboard was wired to the entry drum in German keyboard order, QWERTZ, matching the physical layout of the keys. Rejewski had initially assumed the military version used the same arrangement. He was wrong. He attempted to solve the equations, but failed with inconsistent results. The frustration must have been crushing. Months of work, breakthrough after breakthrough, only to hit a wall at the final step. British cryptologists, when they faced this same problem, gave up. They assumed the Germans would never use something as obvious as alphabetical order. It seemed too simple, too predictable for a machine designed to be unbreakable. Rejewski, perhaps guided by an intuition about a German fondness for order, simply guessed that the wiring was the normal alphabetic ordering. He rewrote his equations with this new assumption: A to A, B to B, C to C. He ran the calculations again, testing his reconstructed rotors against known messages. He later recalled that, after he had made this assumption, from my pencil, as by magic, began to issue numbers designating the connections in rotor N. The machine revealed itself completely. Every rotor wiring. Every reflector connection. The entire internal structure of the German military Enigma, reconstructed from mathematics and intercepted radio signals, without ever physically opening a German military machine. It was December 1932. Adolf Hitler would become Chancellor of Germany in 6 weeks. The Wehrmacht was secretly rearming. War was coming. And a 27-year-old mathematician in Warsaw had just accomplished something British and French intelligence considered impossible. He had broken Enigma. But breaking Enigma once was not enough. The Germans continued modifying their procedures, adding complexity, changing protocols. By 1939, the situation had grown desperate. With war clouds looming over Europe and the Polish Cipher Bureau running short on funds, Poland faced a grim reality. They could not hold back the Wehrmacht alone. Their cryptologic triumph would be useless if Poland fell and the knowledge died with them. Colonel Guido Langer, commander of the Polish Cipher Bureau, organized a secret meeting at the German department complex in Pyry, a wooded area south of Warsaw. The conference began on the 25th and the 26th of July 1939, just 5 weeks before Germany would invade Poland. First came preliminary discussions at the Bristol Hotel in Warsaw, then the main session in Pyry itself, an unimposing bunker-like building hidden among the trees. Poland was represented by Colonel Guido Langer, Colonel Stefan Mayer, Chief of Counterintelligence, Major Maximilian Sieski, head of the German section, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rzycki, and Henryk Zygalski, as well as Antony Paluth and Czeslaw Bletchley, engineers from the AVA plant. The British sent Alastair Denniston, operational head of the Government Code and Cipher School, along with Dilwyn Knox, one of Britain's most brilliant cryptanalysts. The French sent Captain Gustave Bertrand, the same intelligence officer who had delivered Schmidt's documents to Warsaw years earlier. The atmosphere was tense. At a previous meeting in January, the Poles had been reticent, unwilling to reveal their greatest secret. But Hitler's takeover of Czechoslovakia in March had changed everything. Britain had guaranteed Poland's defense. German forces were massing on the borders. SS troops flooded Danzig. Time had run out for secrecy. Langer opened the meeting with a question directed at the British and French. Had their services made any progress on Enigma? The visitors admitted they had not. Knox, renowned for his brilliance, explained the difficulties they had encountered. The French detailed their espionage efforts, Schmidt's documents, the material they had shared. Both delegations assumed this would be another frustrating discussion of an unsolvable problem. Then the head of the Polish Signals Bureau revealed the secret of the Enigma wiring sequence. Rejewski stood and began explaining what he had done 7 years earlier. The mathematics, the permutation theory, the catalogue of rotor positions, the bomba machines. The British and French representatives sat in stunned silence as the Polish mathematician outlined, step by methodical step, how he had broken what they believed unbreakable. Knox's initial reaction was fury. He realized the solution was one he had rejected, the alphabetical wiring order he had dismissed as too obvious. But anger gave way to recognition of the achievement's magnitude. The Poles weren't just theorizing. They had been reading German military traffic for years. On July 25, 1939, 2 copies of the Polish Enigma were handed over. Physical machines, painstakingly reconstructed by Polish engineers. One for Britain. One for France. Along with them came documentation, mathematical frameworks, operating procedures, catalog systems, blueprints for the bomba. Everything Poland had learned in 7 years of secret warfare against German cryptography. According to historians, breaking the code shortened World War II by 2 to 3 years. But in July 1939, no one knew if there would even be a war to shorten, or if Poland would survive to see its contribution recognized. The meeting concluded on July 27. The delegates returned to their capitals carrying the machines in diplomatic pouches. Within 6 weeks, German tanks would cross the Polish border, and the Cipher Bureau would evacuate through Romania. But the knowledge, Rejewski's quiet, methodical breakthrough from that December day in 1932, would survive. It would travel to Bletchley Park in England, where a team including Alan Turing would build upon the Polish foundation to create the industrial-scale code-breaking operation that would help win the war. The boring desk job in Warsaw had accomplished something extraordinary. It had given the Allies a weapon Hitler never knew existed, the ability to read his secrets. The British used the Poles' information and techniques, and the Enigma clone sent to them in August 1939, which greatly increased their previously very limited success in decrypting Enigma messages. The first personnel of the Government Code and Cipher School moved to Bletchley Park on August 15, 1939, just 2 weeks before Germany invaded Poland. They arrived at a Victorian Gothic mansion in Buckinghamshire, surrounded by wooden huts that would soon house the greatest code-breaking operation in history. Alan Turing's initial design of the British bomb was produced in 1939 at Bletchley Park, with an important refinement devised in 1940 by Gordon Welchman. But Turing's machine was fundamentally built upon Rejewski's foundation, the mathematical proof that Enigma could be broken, the permutation theory that revealed its structure, the concept of using electromechanical machines to automate the search through possible settings. The first bomb, code-named Victory, was installed in March 1940 in Hut 1 at Bletchley Park. The second version, Agnus Dei or Agnes, incorporating Welchman's diagonal board, was working by August 1940. The British bomb was larger and faster than the Polish bomba. Each machine was about 7 feet high and wide, 2 feet deep, and weighed about a ton. Where the Polish bomba used 6 interconnected Enigma replicas, The British production model contained 36 scramblers arranged in 3 banks of 12. The engineering was more sophisticated, the searching algorithms more refined. But the intellectual breakthrough, the realization that Enigma's complexity could be attacked through permutation mathematics rather than linguistic analysis, belonged entirely to Rejewski. Production of British bombs was relatively slow at first, with only 5 bombs in use by June 1941, 15 by year's end, 30 by September 1942, 49 by January 1943, but eventually 210 by the end of the war. They were dispersed to outstations across Britain, Adstock, Gayhurst, Stanmore, Eastcote, to protect against bombing raids. By the end of the war, almost 1,676 female Wrens and 263 male RAF personnel were involved in the deployment of 211 bomb machines. The intelligence they produced was staggering. At its peak, the government code and cipher school was reading approximately 4,000 messages per day. German military communications, troop movements, supply schedules, submarine coordinates, strategic plans, all laid bare. The Luftwaffe network, code-named Red at Bletchley Park, was broken regularly and quickly from May 22, 1940, until the end of hostilities. Naval Enigma took longer to crack systematically, but when it fell, the impact on the Battle of the Atlantic was decisive. Intelligence uncovered prior to the Battle of El Alamein in 1942 contributed to victory in this Egyptian campaign, which proved to be a turning point in the war in North Africa. In 1944, Enigma decrypts provided details of German defensive preparations for, and reactions to, the D-Day invasion. Every major Allied operation was shaped, to some degree, by ultra-intelligence, the code name given to information derived from breaking high-level Axis ciphers. It has been estimated that the efforts of Turing and his fellow codebreakers shortened the war by several years. What is certain is that countless lives were saved, Allied convoys that would have been sunk reached port safely, U-boats were hunted down before they could strike, German counterattacks were anticipated and blunted. The intelligence advantage was so overwhelming that German commanders never understood why their operations kept failing, their submarines kept vanishing, their armies kept walking into traps. And through it all, the Germans believed Enigma remained unbreakable. They never suspected that a Polish mathematician working at a desk in Warsaw had unlocked their secrets 7 years before the war even began. Meanwhile, the Poles themselves endured a very different fate. Rejewski and his fellow cipher bureau workers evacuated from Poland to Romania, crossing the border on September 17, 1939, the same day the Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland from the east. The 3 cryptologists made it to Bucharest, where they established contact with the British embassy. The British, incredibly, told them to come back in a few days. Their next step was the French embassy, where they introduced themselves as Friends of Bolek, the code name of Gustave Bertrand. By the end of September, they were in France. From October 20, 1939, they resumed work on decrypting German ciphers as part of a joint French-Polish intelligence unit stationed at Château de Vignoles. They called their operation PC Bruno. After German troops entered Paris in June 1940, Rejewski and his colleagues were evacuated to Algeria. A few months later they returned to work undercover in Vichy, France, at a secret station code-named Cadix in southern France. Then, after the Vichy Free Zone was occupied by Nazi Germany in November 1942, Rejewski and Zygalski escaped via Spain. Their colleague Rositzky had already died, in January 1942 on a ship that sank in mysterious circumstances in the Mediterranean. Rejewski and Zygalski fled across the Pyrenees on foot in January 1943. Despite being robbed by their guide at gunpoint, they reached Spain, only to be put in prison. They were held first at Ciudad de Urgel from January to March 1943, then moved to a prison in Lerida. On May 24 they were released and sent to Madrid. From there they reached Portugal, and finally Gibraltar. They were flown to Britain where they arrived August 3, 1943. But instead of being sent to Bletchley Park to work alongside Turing and the team building on their discoveries, they enlisted in the Polish armed forces and were put to work solving low-grade German ciphers. It was a tragic waste of talent, the men who had broken Enigma relegated to trivial code-breaking tasks while others received credit for work built on their foundation. In 1946, Rejewski returned to his family in Poland and worked as an accountant, remaining silent about his cryptologic work until 1967. His wife Irina and their 2 children, Andrei, born in 1936, and Janina, born in 1939, had survived the war in Poland. But tragedy struck soon after Rejewski's return. In the summer of 1947, His 11-year-old son Andrei died suddenly after 5 days' illness from poliomyelitis. Between 1949 and 1958, Rejewski was repeatedly investigated by the Polish security service but never divulged that he had worked on Enigma. Poland was now under Soviet domination, and revealing his wartime intelligence work would have been dangerous. In 1950, the security service demanded that he be fired from his employment. He moved between jobs, director at the State Surveying Company, positions at various cooperatives. From 1954 until his retirement in February 1967, he was director of the Inspectorate of Costs and Prices at a provincial association of labor cooperatives. For 20 years, the man who had broken the most important cipher in modern history lived in obscurity, working as an accountant and bureaucrat, saying nothing. He broke his silence in 1967 when he provided to the Polish Military Historical Institute his memoirs of his work in the Cipher Bureau. In a 1967 book, the Władysław Kozakzuk disclosed Poland's breaking of the German Enigma ciphers, and slowly the truth began to emerge. Rejewski fought a gallant fight to get the truth before the public. He published papers on his cryptologic work and contributed generously to articles, books, and television programs. He was interviewed by journalists and film crews from Poland, the United States, Britain, and beyond. On August 12, 1978, he received the Officer's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta. Rejewski, who had been suffering from heart disease, died of a heart attack on February 13, 1980, aged 74, after returning home from a shopping trip. He was buried with military honors at Warsaw's Pulaski Military Cemetery. On July 21, 2000, Poland's president posthumously awarded the Grand Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta to Marian Rejewski and Henryk Zygalski. In July 2005, Rejewski's daughter Janina received on his behalf the War Medal 1939 to 1945 from the British Chief of the Defense Staff. The recognition came decades too late. The man who had unlocked Hitler's secrets spent most of his life in silence, his contribution buried under Churchill's secrecy order and Soviet suspicion. But the mathematics he developed in that Warsaw office in December 1932, the permutation theory, the cyclometer, the bomba, became the foundation for one of the most consequential intelligence triumphs in history. There is a photograph of Marian Rejewski taken late in life. He sits in a modest apartment, white-haired and bespectacled, wearing a dark suit. His expression is calm, almost gentle. Nothing about him suggests the magnitude of what he accomplished. He looks like what he was for most of his adult life, an accountant, a bureaucrat, an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But that ordinariness is precisely the point. Rejewski didn't break Enigma through daring espionage or dramatic confrontation. He did it through patience, through methodical mathematical reasoning, through the willingness to sit at a desk day after day wrestling with equations that seemed unsolvable. His weapon wasn't a gun or a bomb, it was a pencil and paper. His battlefield wasn't Normandy or Stalingrad. It was a small underground room in the Saxon palace where he transformed abstract permutation theory into the key that unlocked Hitler's secrets. When the Enigma story finally broke, Alan Turing received most of the public credit, while Rejewski's foundational work remained largely unknown outside specialist circles. History often works that way. The dramatic gets remembered, the methodical gets forgotten. But without Rejewski's breakthrough in 1932, without his proof that Enigma could be broken through mathematics, there would have been no Bletchley Park success, no ultra-intelligence, no shortened war. His boring desk job in Warsaw changed the course of human history. It proved that the most sophisticated military technology could be defeated not through force, but through thought. It demonstrated that a small nation, facing overwhelming odds, could still strike a decisive blow if it valued intellect and invested in its brightest minds. And it showed that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on beaches or in forests, but in quiet rooms by quiet people solving impossible problems one equation at a time. Rejewski died in 1980, finally recognized but never famous, his name known to historians but not to the world. Yet his legacy endures in every encrypted message sent today, in every algorithm designed to protect or penetrate secrecy. He taught us that codes can be broken, that mathematics is power, and that a single person working at a desk can change the fate of nations.